Hello, world. You're listening to Eleanor Wagner's Strange and Scary World here on the Paranormal UK radio network, where we're always creeping it real. I'm your host, Eleanor Wagner. I hope you enjoyed our soundtrack music performed by Silent Crafter's Stranger Part 2 off the Stranger Part 2 album. Welcome all to my paranormal closet where the stories and magic takes place. Today's guest is a paranormal researcher who has had many strange experiences in his life. He's a radio show host, tarot reader, and a shamanic, I think that's how you pronounce it, shamanic practitioner. He's undergone past life regression and remembers at least 3 past lives, which is our main focus of discussion for today's show. Join me in welcoming Mark Johnson.
Hi, Eleanor.
Hi, Mark.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for joining me. Just to give the listeners a little idea about what reincarnation and past life regression is all about. Reincarnation in English means the rebirth of a soul into a new body after death. Many believers of reincarnation assert that the soul enters an in-between plane of life after death, entering a period of continuation before it moves on to its next phase, which at times entails a soul that can enter a new body. It's believed the soul can choose its next parents and or the lesson it wishes to experience in order to evolve spiritually. Mark and I have a bit history. We first met when he came to one of my book signings back in 2019. Since then, he helped me establish this podcast and subsequently become a part of Paranormal UK radio network. While doing so, I discovered fascinating things about Mark and his background, one being the reincarnation stories. Please do tell, take us through those discoveries, if you will, and how it all came to fruition.
I've always been fascinated with the idea of past lives, and growing up and on my own spiritual journey, I had some strange things happen in terms of dreams. I've had dreams when I was younger about being out of body. I was in high school, and I dreamed that I was outside my backyard in the middle of the night. I knew I was out of my body. There was somebody else there who seemed to be someone my age. I had no idea who they were. I'm guessing now it might have been a guide. And I'm sitting there looking at myself, and even though it was supposed to be pitch black out, it was like bright, but had a greenish tint to it. It was almost like looking through modern IR night vision goggles. So it was very, very interesting. Then I had later in my 20s, almost going into my 30s, I had a dream that it stayed with me for the longest time. And with this dream, I found myself fighting in World War II. I was an American soldier. I was running through a field of grass, and there were some flowers and bushes with other soldiers running onto a German position. So it was in Europe. And during this rush, I got shot, and I felt it hit me right in the chest. I dropped. I didn't feel pain. It was more like a gut punch, but it wasn't painful. It knocked the wind out of me. And I think I was in shock and delirium because I had a grenade on me and I was still trying to be in the fight. So I pulled a grenade to throw the grenade. I mean, I didn't even know when or where. I was just doing it. And just before I threw the grenade, I got shot again. I dropped the grenade behind me. It went off. I felt the concussion. Everything went to black. I felt like I stopped breathing. Everything just faded right to black. With a second or two later, I jump up in bed gasping for breath. And it just really hit me hard. I'm sitting there, I didn't know what to think of it. I didn't think of it being a past life memory. I thought it was just a very intense dream, but I wasn't sure. And then it wasn't until a few years later when I went to the theater and saw Saving Private Ryan. And watching that movie, and there were a couple of scenes where they were advancing up, running up through a firefight up through these fields, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was in Normandy, and I got killed in Normandy.
personally, I've had recurring dreams of being in the Victorian era, and I've always had an immense connection to that era. And I just know that's where I was at one point in time.
I mean, to the point, again, feeling getting shot, feeling the explosion, and then feeling my body shut down as my mind faded to black. I stopped breathing, and then I woke up gasping. But like I said, it took several more years. That dream always stayed with me. But yeah, that was very interesting.
Have you ever been able to find out who you were in that time frame?
It was anonymous. I have no idea who I was. I don't have a name. I don't have any information or feelings or sensations. It was like my higher self just wanted to show me that one snippet of my life and of that past life, and that was it. To date, I have no idea who that person was.
I had never experienced a dream like that up until the last few years. I had this one dream, and it actually happened just before I decided to have my past life regression, because it was so vivid and so in detail. And I felt exactly like you felt that shot. I felt when I was in the crash of this car. And it took place around the 40s or the 50s, and the only way I was able to distinguish that was because of what I was wearing and the car that I was driving. But it definitely felt like it was real, and I could see it from my eyes, like as if I was living it, not like I was watching a movie. And everybody that I had spoken to said, you're just reliving your death in a previous life. And so that's what prompted me to go and get that past life regression. And I know you have said that you've gone through past life regression as well, correct?
First time was about 10 years ago. I was contacted by a hypnotherapist who was writing a book about doing past life regressions. And she was looking for test subjects to use in her book. So she sent me a recording to play of her doing a hypnotic regression. So I would listen to it a few times. I would try to do it. Nothing happened. I'm real bad with that. And I have a hard time meditating or being a hypnotic subject. But all of a sudden, I found myself standing in what I can only describe as like a house in a study or a library in a house. And again, it was definitely a house with a lot of money. It was old fashioned, and there were shelves with books, and there was desks and papers and everything. And it was very ornate, very Victorian era. And I looked down and I saw that I was a young woman. And I was wearing this green type of dress that I would, if I had to guess, was in around the 1850s or 60s, somewhere along there. And so I was very curious. So there was a mirror on the wall. So I walked up and looked in the mirror, and I could see myself. Kind of looked like me, but not, but also had red hair and like curly hair, and it was very interesting. And I'm sitting there intrigued by it. Then the name Marion Howe just popped into my head. And then Boston popped into my head. So I knew that this young woman, the house was located in Boston, and her name was Marion Howe. Now that's really about all I got. And then I kind of snapped out of the vision, the memory, whatever it was. And so because I had a name, I had an approximate time frame because I recognized the clothing and the style of the clothing and a city. I started doing online research, and it took me about a day, and I found her. And her full name, Florence Marion Howe. Marion was like a middle name, who happened to be the daughter of Julia Ward Howe, who she and her husband were famous abolitionists. He ran a school for the deaf in Boston. And Julia Ward Howe wrote the song, The Battle Hymn of the Republic, for the Civil War. That's what she is most famous for. Digging and doing a little more research, I found a little bit more on Florence, or as they say, they supposedly called her Flossie. But she became an author. She wrote a book on etiquette and co-wrote a book with one of her sisters, which was a Pulitzer Prize winning autobiography on their mother. So I tracked her down she married an attorney. She lived in New Jersey for a while, over in Highbridge, New Jersey, and then eventually died in the early, I think 1920 or something like that. And she was born in, I think, 1848 or something around that line. It's been a while since I've looked at the material. And she's been reburied, taken back home and buried back up in Boston. But they have one of those websites where you can find somebody's headstone. Well, I found her headstone, so I know where she's buried. Interesting to find somebody and learn all about their life. And I just, in that past life memory, I had that one snippet of who she was at a young age.
Judging from the photographs you sent me, it's really uncanny. You can definitely see the possibility that was you.
Yeah, I don't believe that you have to look the same in every life, but right. Again, at the same time, it was interesting how there was a resemblance to me when I was very young. Not this old ugly guy right now, but yeah, it was intriguing, and she was a writer. I dabble in writing. I haven't really written much, but I dabble in writing, or I do other creative things. And so that was really intriguing. And then the third life, and this one is the briefest of them all. I was doing a podcast with my recording partner, Bruce Pearson. We had a show called Unknown Origins Radio, and this was several years ago. He had a friend who was a hypnotherapist who did past life regressions. So we were recording in his studio out over in Clinton, and we had his guest came on site. And so before the show, he did a past life regression for me. And he was talking me through, I was laying on the couch, he was talking me through, and then I suddenly got an image of an older European city. I didn't see much. I just remember there was a river, there was this curved arch bridge, and this one man who was pulling a cart with wares, selling wares. And he had on a cap that kind of came down over his ears. It looked like those old medieval, 1400s, around that time. And he was pulling a cart. And that's all I got. I just got no name, no nothing. I just saw this man pulling a cart. And then it hit me that it was in Florence, Italy. So
Florence connection.
Oh, you're right. I didn't even think of that. Again, I just remember mostly the stone bridge and the river, and now I look up photos of Florence, and of course it doesn't look anything like it did back then. There's the river that runs through, of course, mostly modern bridges, but it was just an bland, uninteresting life. This guy just working, doing his thing, selling his stuff, pulling his cart behind him. Didn't even have a horse or a donkey to do it. He was pulling it himself.
During my past life regression, there are a lot of things that came through. And there's probably 5 or 6 different ones that were very, very vivid. And strangely enough, the Victorian era didn't come up. Titanic didn't come up, which is another thing I'm very connected with. Nor did the dream that I had of that car accident, which may have happened somewhere in the 50s. So I often think back and say to myself, was it real? Wasn't it real? But they were so vivid that it's hard to almost deny it for myself.
Now, I know there's a lot of people who've done work with hypnotic regressions, everyone from Dolores Cannon to Dr. John Mack. I mean, a lot of their work was mostly regressing UFO abductees and experiencers. but still there's you have Dr. Raymond Moody and others who do the past life regressions and come up with all sorts of different experiences for people and bringing up these memories. And sometimes these regressions can help in a therapeutic way for somebody. Let's say somebody's suffering a phobia in modern day, that maybe they have an intense fear of heights. And maybe that's because they died by falling. It's a very real possibility. I know I have an irrational fear of being killed and eaten by a wild animal. I don't know why, but here I live in the woods and I got bears walking around here. But I think that either that's just something in my head, or maybe that's a past life memory sneaking through. You just don't know.
In India, they very firmly believe in reincarnation, and study after study of families actually reuniting with their former selves' families, which I found very, very interesting. But now, like in America, it's becoming more well known. But there are these fears that if you have a child of 5 who says, my mommy beats me, or I was beaten to death, that you're going to be brought up on charges because your kid is saying that you beat him, even though he's saying it was my other mommy, like that kind of thing. So that's really scary when you think about it. And the other thing that I've also learned is that there are researchers that believe we live our lives with the same people in different circumstances. In one life, you might be a brother and a sister. In another life, you might be a married couple, and so on. And I can see that being a possibility. I really can. I mean, my daughter has been told several times by mediums and card readers that she was my mother in a previous life, and it really comes out now when she tries to mother me. And then there was time when I worked in the city, and I'd be walking around, and thousands and thousands of people in the streets of New York City, and I would walk past people, not knowing who they were, but feeling like, oh, I know that person from somewhere. It was a peculiar feeling, but it was very, very intense. And I just felt certain that I knew that person. I don't know where, but I did. So I feel like there might be some sort of connection in that somehow.
A lot of the research that I've done, they talk about the fact that we come back in soul groups. So there's several of us, or many of us, that come back at roughly the same time, all interacting. In fact, we plan our lives out. After each life, you plan the next one. That's a very linear way of thinking, because more recently I'm starting to lean more towards the idea, since time itself doesn't exist, and there's a lot of theories about living multiple lives at the same time. Because if time doesn't exist, time is linear. But even astrophysicists like Dr. Michio Kaku and Neil deGrasse Tyson, they talk about with string theory, that time, there is no time. It's all happening at once. With that being said, you could be living, or your higher self, your higher spirit could be living all of your lives right now, simultaneously. I liken it to like a peach with fuzz on it. And each hair on that peach is stretching out and going into another lifetime or another reality. So that one hair is going in and having one experiences, but then there's all the other hairs out there, and they're all going in and having the other experiences at the same time, all being fed into the main source, which is our higher selves, our soul, our spirit, whatever you want to call it, that is sent here to have these experiences. And that's one of the main themes that in some of the research I've done, I've even talked with channelers, people who were channeling, and about, why we do this. And of course, it's all about growth, and it's all about learning. It's living the human experience, the good and the bad. You're experiencing the good, you're experiencing the bad, you're taking all of those experiences. Some people who can get angry at God because, their spouse or their mother or whatever got cancer, they themselves got cancer, Why am I doing this? Well, that's the life experience that we're here to experience. Now, some people think, oh my God, that is so cruel. Yet when we pass and return over to the other side, it all feels like it was an instant, and it's a memory, and it's a learned experience that becomes a part of the whole of not just this lifetime, all of the lifetimes together. While I was talking with a friend who is a very strong psychic, and we were just having a conversation, and every now and then she would kind of like slip out and somebody else would come in and start talking to me. And it was either her higher self or guides or I'm not sure who it was. And during all the turmoil we've been having the last couple of years. So I was starting to ask about, when are we going to get past this? When are things going to get better? Blah, blah, blah. And I got scolded. I got schooled. Basically told me to suck it up and deal with it, because we're here to experience things. We're here to experience these times. We're here to experience everything that happens, good or bad, and complaining about it or worrying about it does no good. Now, that's not to say we don't have free will. That's not to say we can't do something about our lives. We can still choose to do whatever we want. You get cancer, you could choose to fight it. You can choose to use regular methods. You choose to use alternative methods. But again, you're still going through the whole experiences. The analogy I've always liked is, we have to go through these experiences because just telling somebody something is not as powerful as actually living it. You have a child, you tell them, don't touch that hot stove. Okay. They could not touch the hot stove because you told them to, but then there's the child who actually reaches up and touches that stove. Well, they get burned and they pull back, and they learned from that experience, don't ever touch that hot stove again. They've experienced something that the child who didn't touch it won't fully understand or comprehend. No, I'm not sitting there saying kids need to go and touch hot stoves. That's not the point. The point is, that's why we're here having these experiences, whether they're good or bad. And if they're bad, we suck it up and we do our best to get through it and past it and, live our lives and try to make it as good as possible and get back into good experiences. We've all had times in our lives where we're at our lowest and things, where we could be filled with despair and think that it's going to be like this forever and things are never going to get better. But they do. They do. Whether you lose a loved one, whether you've had a bad accident and it's going to take you years to recover, whether you're dealing with a long illness, or even, if people are treating you wrong or you're in a situation, maybe an abusive relationship. There are things to be learned from those scenarios. But as I mentioned earlier, there's still some free will involved. You can choose on how you deal with that scenario. If you're in a bad situation that you can get out of it, make the changes that you can. But if you can't change it, if something's going on that is just beyond your control, we endure it, because we're still going to learn from it. And still people say, well, what am I going to learn? What am I going to learn? It doesn't really matter. Sometimes it's hard to put it into earthly words. It's the end result that's what matters. When we leave this life, when we go back over and we take all of these experiences with us, what have we learned from this lifetime? And then, of course, we live multiple lives. Let's say we had a plan that we're supposed to do in this lifetime, but because of free will and certain choices, that may not work out, may not have learned the lesson. You may have to live 3, 4, 100 lifetimes in order to learn a single lesson. Now, you're still learning a lot of other things along the way, but that's the whole point of it. That's the whole point of us being here. And again, it's, there is that concept of multiple lives at once, or you can choose to look at it linearly if it helps you understand the concept better. It really doesn't matter.
What's brought you to this point about believing in the linear as opposed to the other, and there being multiple dimensions is the word I'm trying to think of?
All the different theories I've been exposed to, it starts to help explain things better than in a linear fashion. Here's a perfect example. Have you ever had a precognitive dream? Okay. How can you dream of something that's going to happen in the future when it hasn't happened yet if we live in a linear timeline? The only way to do that is if there is no time, and all aspects of time, and actually all different versions of the future and reality are available to us through the superconscious. Some people have premonition dreams and they don't happen. They don't come true. Maybe it's because certain factors changed between the time of the dream and the time that things were supposed to happen to change. And I do believe the future can change, because I think and this is where we get into the whole multiverse of madness, as Marvel calls it, because every time we make a decision, we could go left or we could go right. There's the what if. In this lifetime, let's say right now we choose to go left. Well, maybe there's an alternate reality where we chose to go right. And that reality branches off in different reality, different timeline. It's mind-twisting stuff. I like to quote Whitley Strieber, who wrote the book Communion, and many different books after that. And I've had a chance to interview him a few times. Really, really sweet gentleman. And one of the things that he talked about in his later books, because he practices transcendental meditation, and he saw during a few of his meditations different versions of himself living in different realities. Some of them included his wife. A couple of them, he was alone. In one with his wife, they were poor. They had nothing. They were like living in poverty. Another one, he was living in a totally different state and city. And then what's weird is this same psychic friend of mine, she sometimes slips in and out of different realities, and she remembers talking with me and during certain times, and I was smoking. I don't smoke. So, and we realized that it was a different reality, an alternate timeline that you could say. So the precognitive and seeing the future, or being warned of things that are going to happen in the future, or even looking back into the past. If time really is linear, how can we look back into the past or dream about the past if we're in the right here and now constantly? Now you could say, well, it's a memory. Well, yeah, it's a past life memory. But then when you also dream of future, there are people who have had future life regressions where they're going to be in a couple hundred years from now. So that types of phenomenon started to help me to question the nature of our reality, the nature of time, even how I view the paranormal. And being a paranormal investigator, I've investigated many different locations, and started off like most investigators, believing in the old traditional ghost theories. And that's changed so much over the years, because time is so, being that there really is no time is wonky. As Doctor Who once said, it was this wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey stuff, where sometimes somebody might see a ghost, and that ghost reacts to them. I had a friend who was touring a house with her husband that they were looking to buy. And she went by herself, walked upstairs, opened the door, and there was a woman standing there in what looked like 1920s era servant garb, maid uniform. And she looked at this woman. Well, the woman turned and looked at her, and both their jaws dropped in shock. Now, most paranormal investigators would sit there and tell you, oh, well, that's the spirit of somebody who died. They don't know they died. They're living out their everyday routine, blah, blah, blah. And I just say, no, no. Now, what I believe in some, and not all situations, but some situations, especially when you're interacting with the spirits, not just a memory loop or a residual haunting, you may be seeing an actual living, breathing person, just as real as you are, that just happens to be existing in another timeline. And for whatever reason, the conditions are right in that time and space that those two times converge and they can become aware of each other. And people can become aware of each other. Yeah, I think that they were two very much living people who just happened to see each other across a portal in time.
Oh, what are your thoughts on time travel?
I don't believe. Maybe one day there'll be some technology to do it. I know if you have you ever heard of Andrew DiBasciago? Okay, he interviewed him a few years ago. He before he got ill, he was running the circuit. He claims he was part of the MK Ultra program based out of Montauk, out on Long Island. His father was in the military, and when he was a child, he was inducted into these experiments with MK Ultra, kind of like if you watch Stranger Things with 11. They had a time travel program where they had several different methods that they would use to send people to either be able to view a past event or actually go back to a past event. They had something called the chronovisor that they used. And at one point, they sent him back to Gettysburg during Lincoln's address. And being a young boy, they put him in clothing and they sent him back there. And he had this cylinder, and he was supposed to find this military officer or whatnot and hand them this cylinder. He doesn't know what was in it. But while he was there, he interacted with a few people and actually watched Lincoln do the address. Now, there's a famous photograph of people all lined up to hear Lincoln's speech. And in the very front of the photograph, there's a young boy standing there. And he's holding what looks like a cylinder. He claims that's him.
Wow.
Now, do I 100% believe that? I mean, he tells a fantastic tale. He's told many, many, many different tales, and his story for all over the years has always remained consistent. But they really stretch credibility, especially since there's no physical proof of it, other than the fact that he said he was out at Montauk, and we know Montauk existed. There was another one over in Morristown, New Jersey. So that type of time travel, physically stepping into a machine or going through a portal and coming out into another area of time, I'm not sure. I think we can definitely do it when we're astral traveling, out of body experiences on a spiritual level. Much more easy to navigate the timelines when we're out of these physical meat suits. But it's not impossible. I think that there is some technology that allows them to do that, especially when you look at some cases, and I'll use the Skinwalker Ranch as an excellent case. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Secret of Skinwalker Ranch on the History Channel. I highly recommend it. Definitely watch it. I think you can pull up old versions of it on Discovery Plus, the first 2 seasons. Because there was a book called Hunt for the Skinwalker that came out in the early 2000s about the family who bought this ranch in northern Utah. And they were on the ranch 2.5 years, and they had all sorts of wild, every type of strange phenomena you can think of. They had UFOs, strange animals, cattle mutilations, everything. One of the things they saw a few times, they witnessed what looked like a portal opening in the sky. It was like dusk, almost dark. This portal opens. They could see bright daylight, blue sky behind it, and a UFO flies out of it into our universe. Then it closes up. So, but I think that there's also stories of Von Brashler. I interviewed him for one of my shows about a month and a half ago. And he wrote a book called on time slips. There's a famous case of these two French women back in the 50s. They're walking through Paris and things started to change. And the next thing they realized, they were in Paris during the time of Louis the 16th. And they were walking around looking at all these people, and it lasted several minutes before they suddenly found themselves back to where they were. Now, how did that happen? Did they go through a natural portal, a time portal? So time travel itself, from the traditional sci-fi point of view, I'm not sure of, but it does happen. It can happen in different ways that I think are just a little bit beyond our comprehension.
Do you suppose the government was trying to accomplish that little boy go back? Do you think they were trying to send him a message, watch out for your life, you might be assassinated, or what do you think?
They told him not to directly interfere with anything. They gave him instructions. He really wasn't supposed to talk to anybody, just hand this cylinder to this one military guy, but he wound up talking to a couple different people because he didn't have quite the right clothes. Somebody gave him some clothes to blend in more, but he was there to observe. Supposedly he was sent back to observe the crucifixion of Jesus, was one of the ones that he did. And they used children a lot, young children in their preteens and early teens, because supposedly it was easier for them to handle the time travel elements using these chronovisor, these machines, the Montauk chair as they called it, because when adults tried doing it, they had a tendency of going insane and not being able to handle it. So, but they were all other experiments on kids out there too. So it was pretty insidious, a lot of the stuff that they did.
Your first paranormal encounter, do you recall what it was?
My first paranormal encounter was interesting. Trying to think. When I was growing up, I used to hear my name being called a lot. It would almost sound like my mother. I go and this would even be during the day. Like, okay. So one morning I woke up, I was lying in bed. I was still half asleep. So I was just laying there. And then I heard my name called again. And I couldn't tell you if it was a man or woman. It was such a generic voice, but they just go, Mark. So I decided to answer. I go, yes. The next thing I know, I suddenly felt like I was sinking into the mattress. Scared the living crap out of me. I had no idea what was going on, and I fought it, and I couldn't move. I was half paralyzed. I'm sitting there going, go away, in my mind. Go away, go away, go away. Leave me alone. Go away. After a minute, it subsided and freaked me out, and I got up and wondered what was going on. Now that I'm older and wiser, I'm kicking myself because that, from everything that I've read from other people's experience, that was the beginning of an out-of-body experience, which I always wanted. And I fought it because it scared me. So that didn't happen. But then there was another time, paranormal, some friends of mine in high school, we watched this old documentary on TV. It was this old cheesy documentary called The Amazing World of Psychic Phenomenon, narrated by Aaron Burr. You can actually look it up on IMDb. It's out there. And there was a segment where this one scientist was going to graveyards with a reel-to-reel tape recorder. And he was tape recording graves. This was way back before anyone had coined the term EVP. So being stupid, young 14, 15-year-olds, I got my brother and my friend to go, yeah, we got to go do this. So we grabbed a cassette tape recorder. We went out. There was a graveyard in our town, an old pioneer cemetery in California. And we went in there in the afternoon and we started trying to tape record graves. Well, we were there about an hour. Nothing happened. Moved to the one corner of the cemetery, and there was this one grave. The headstone was missing. There was a lot of vandalism. But it was an above ground like crypt that had a cement slab up top So like they had a cement slab cover instead of it being fully buried on the ground. So I put the tape recorder on there, and we weren't asking questions or anything. We were just taping silence. Set the tape recorder on there, walked several feet away, and we stood there quietly watching it. We're in the middle of this cemetery. Nobody is around. You can't hear anybody talking in the distance. Nothing. I come back, pick up the tape recorder, play it back, and we're listening. And a couple of minutes in it, all of a sudden we hear what sounds like a woman whispering. So we play it back, crank the volume, and we hear a woman's voice whispering. She says, "I'm dead. Help me." Yeah. Well, my one friend got freaked out. He wanted to run the hell out of there right then and there. But for some reason, this kind of stuff never scared me. And I'm sitting there going, no, we got to see if we can get more. So I placed the recorder down, hit play, walked away, let it go a few minutes, came back, played it back. And on the recording, you could hear, the click, because it's a manual tape recorder. You hear the click. You hear my footsteps walking away. And just as my footsteps fade, this woman's voice came in crystal clear, like I am right now. But yet her voice had an echoey quality, like it was in an enclosed space. And she goes, "It isn't finished." And that's all we got. But that was my first EVP encounter.
Did you happen to know if the gravestone was a female or a male's?
The headstone was missing. So we had no idea who was buried there. And we tried going to the Historical Society to see if we could, look up the plots, whatever. They didn't really have a layout of who was buried where there yet. It was an older cemetery, people who migrated to the north of Los Angeles back in the 1800s.
Interesting. Wow, that's pretty crazy. I know that you do the radio thing, and your radio show you were on, you decided to take a break from. Are you doing anything in radio still, or?
I started doing, and then I it's kind of sporadic right now. I'm trying to start up another show, a solo show called Astral Perceptions, that's going to discuss less standard paranormal phenomena and more of the real out there kind of, or different types of spiritual concepts. And I've got some guests lined up. I did a few shows last year where it was just me talking, but nobody wants to hear me talking for an hour. I tend to ramble, so I'm much better having somebody to bounce off of. So like I did my first one about a month and a half ago with Von Brashler on time slips. And then things happened so I wasn't able to do anything. Now I'm lining up some more guests. So I'm going to be doing some interviews in the coming weeks for the Paranormal UK radio network for Astral Perceptions. And it'll be like this. I'll be doing both a audio podcast, but I'll have a video version as well.
And does your does your shamanic practicing have a place in this whole new venture?
It does. I one of my early shows that I did, I interviewed one of my teachers who I took a year-long course in shamanic healing and practitioner a few years ago. There was an additional course that was optional to take called depossession. And it sounded interesting, and so I wanted to take it. Some people were afraid to take it just because you hear the name, you think, oh my God, you're dealing with demons and exorcisms. That's not it at all. Basically, it's a form of healing that recognizes when somebody has a human spirit attachment. And getting it to understand what they're doing, where they really are, and where they need to go, and helping to cross them over to the other side. And she demonstrated this with one of the people in the class. She was asking questions. She was saying that there's telltale signs that somebody will do something unusual, like keep doing this or touching themselves or whatever. There's some kind of signal that lets her know that there's something not right there. So she would get that person sit right across from him and just start talking to them. and then start saying, I'm talking to the person inside you. What's your name? And suddenly the person would start talking as a different person. That
Ooh.
spirit entity would come through. This woman had a child attached to her, and I think her name was Emily. She died of some kind of sickness a long time ago, and she was just attaching to the woman, kind of like looking for a mother figure. But sometimes these spirit attachments, they do it because they still want to feel aspects of the physical. I was told during training that let's say there's somebody who's an alcoholic. Okay. In many cases, they say that normally the first 2 drinks are yours, but after that, you're drinking for somebody else. And there might be a spirit attachment there, somebody who loved alcohol and they're in another life and they want to keep reliving that experience, and they've attached themselves to somebody to keep having that experience.
Interesting.
And they one time did a depossession on this woman who came in, who was a raging alcoholic, and she said, "You're not going to be able to help me. I've been drinking all my life. I've gone to healings or Reiki sessions, whatever. And what's the first thing you do? I leave and I go to a bar." Well, they did this depossession on her. They found a spirit that had attached itself to her. And the trick is to not get the spirit to acknowledge who they are, what they're doing, and then you get them to look inside themselves and say, "Do you see that light that's inside of you in your heart area?" And they'll go, "Yeah." And you go, "That's your spirit light. You need to concentrate on that and grow that." And then you're also at the same time opening a portal for their guides or loved ones to see that light in their heart and to get them to grow it and expand on it, to focus on it and concentrate on it. Then you tell them, "Look above. Do you see those people up there?" And basically it's getting them to look up and see that portal, that tunnel or whatever. And there's either guides or loved ones or an old family member.
Mm-hmm.
They're there waiting for them. And then you encourage them to go to them. Go to your family. That's where you belong. It's a very loving, highly emotional scene. And when we watched her perform this on one of the students, by the end of it, we were all bawling in tears because you could feel, I couldn't see a thing, but I felt it. I felt when this spirit transitioned. And it was incredible.
I imagine there are a lot of people out there that have attachments that don't even know it. I've thought about that at times.
Yeah, I mean, you hear of demonic attachments. That's the popular one. But if somebody is acting, let's say you have somebody dealing with a lot of depression, or you have somebody who has some other type of problem where they don't feel right, they don't feel like themselves. I'm not saying, first and foremost, people should seek regular medical attention. Okay. But at the same time, if there's an opportunity to find a practitioner, somebody who does this, maybe if there is an attachment, they can help get it to move on. And that's the whole point of it, convincing that attachment they no longer need to be there. And when they're gone, the person feels so much freer and lighter and more like themselves.
So the woman alcoholic, she was healed?
Let's put it this way. After she said that nobody can do anything about it, they put her through the healing. They did their depossession. She drove out of there, went straight home, and never drank again. And
wow.
She contacted them back a few months later and was just amazed. She goes, "I don't know what you guys did, but she had no desire."
Whatever it was. That's great. That's really cool. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why don't you tell the listeners that are here where they can find you and listen to your previous recordings on radio and everything about you?
Well, if you go on to our website on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, paukradio.com, We also are on pretty much every major podcast platform, from Apple Podcasts, Samsung, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio. Just type in Paranormal UK Radio Network. It brings up a whole list of our shows, and then you can sort and look for Astral Perceptions. And I have several shows out there. Like I said, most of them are old. The newest was about a month or so ago, but I will have more new shows coming up within the next couple of weeks.
That's really exciting. I'm excited to listen to it. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to having you back on, especially after Astral Perceptions has been on for a while, so we could discuss some previous recordings. So thank you for coming tonight.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
If you've liked listening to this week's episode and you're into all things paranormal, check out my other show, Eleanor Wagner's Creepin' It Real, on the Coast to Coast Entertainment Network, which is available wherever you get your podcasts. And if any of you are interested in reading any of my books, you can find the links to them on my website, authoreleanorwagner.com. I write about the history of the town and the location, throw the paranormal into the mix, and love to put photos and evidence for you to listen and look in. Do you personally have any special gifts and stories you want to share? You can send them to me at authoreleanorwagner@gmail.com.
Ghostly listeners, you can follow me on my website, authoreleanorwagner.com. Thank you, paranormal enthusiasts, for tuning in today. I hope you'll come back again. Remember to tap into your own gifts. Everyone has them. And in the meantime, make sure you're creeping it real.